Akira crossed over and entered a terrifying game in an infinite flow world, becoming one of the awakened NPCs. As an NPC, her profession is a chef and she has the ability to identify items. Well, this profession and ability cannot be said to be the same, but irrelevant. In order to survive in the dungeon, Akira understands the essence of relying solely on hard work for development, evading player pursuit while touching corpses. In the end, as an NPC with a 100% survival rate, Akira was upgraded. She became the head chef of the entire infinite flow world, able to shuttle through every instance and deliver the most delicious cuisine to every player and NPC. But as her abilities continue to strengthen, why do other awakened NPCs look at her with increasingly strange eyes? Is that appetite-filled gaze misplaced? She's just an NPC, hey. Keywords of the novel. I am the chef in the thrilling unlimited stream without pop-ups. I am the chef in the thrilling unlimited stream. Download the complete TXT collection, and read the latest chapters in the thrilling unlimited stream as the chef. Chapter 1. Awakening. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Awakening. I heard that another instance of the horror world has disappeared. I heard it was made by the top-ranked boss. Don't worry about the big shots, let's survive in this dungeon first. I thought the Love Castle would be different. After all, its level is not high, its name is tempting, and I didn't expect it to still have a horror theme. Hey, Chili eavesdropped on the corner of the wall and finally confirmed something. This is a dungeon in the horror world, and she is likely just an NPC. The 4 men and 3 women talking in the hall are game players, who are also ranked. The dungeon they are in is called Love Castle. Players need to survive in the castle for a week and then earn points and props. As for myself, this NPC is probably the cannon fodder for them to practice. She sadly returned to her own territory. The kitchen. She has been passing through from the main star for a week now and has some scattered memories of this NPC. I applied to be the chef of this castle a year ago, and although I don't have a complete memory, I have learned a lot from the sidelines. She works as a cook in the castle, and her monthly salary is quite high. When she first woke up, she was still grateful because she had a private restaurant on her main star and was adept at her old profession. She leaned against the desk and scanned the environment in the kitchen. There is a chubby cook in the kitchen who comes to clean every day for a living. She plans to clean up the kitchen supplies. Pack the kitchen knife first. A regular kitchen knife, its function is to cut vegetables. She was pleasantly surprised as she swung the kitchen knife around a line that suddenly appeared in front of her. As a modern person who occasionally plays games, she naturally understands what this means. She jumps in joy, puts down the kitchen knife, and holds the iron pot she usually uses for cooking. A regular iron pot can be used by skilled chefs to make delicious food. Damn it, there's not a single prop in the kitchen. I wouldn't really be carrying it like this, would I? Autumnly pouted. Pick up an inconspicuous cloth next to the desk. An unusual cloth. Place it on your head and you can become invisible for 3 minutes. As long as it doesn't rot, it will continue to make you invisible. Cooling time. 1 hour. She looked at the introduction on the rag, paused for a moment, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The rag had been washed clean from its original body, with only a small amount of old oil stains that could not be washed away. This was what she saved her life from. In her original memory, there are often nightmares about her being killed by strangers. At the beginning of her journey, she thought it was a nightmare. Now I guess she was cracked by the player as an NPC. Maybe it was because she cracked too many times that she came through. Based on her intuition, she vaguely felt that it was not a good thing to always be hit. If she persisted or fought back, she might gain more skills. She leaned against the desk and pulled her thoughts back to the present moment, analyzing the possibility of escaping this instance from the player's conversation she had overheard. Her gaze was burning. She always wanted to give it a try. She wanted to return to the main star, and the ghost wanted to become an NPC. With a plan in mind, her footsteps relaxed as well. The kitchen was full of ingredients, so let's make Sichuan cuisine tonight. These despicable players are so spicy. When the cook, who is usually in the kitchen and has a waist thicker than 2 autumn pears, walked in, her food was already ready. The cook's round garlic-like nose sniffed and then sneezed. "Dear autumn pears, what flavor did you put in so strong?" Chili dodged back and dodged her hand that was about to touch her arm. She smiled and replied, "Put some chili peppers to stimulate your appetite. Today is the second day the players are staying here, and according to their conversation, the thriller mode is about to start tonight. Eating some chili peppers will help boost your mood." When the cook pushed the dining cart out of the kitchen, she even gave Akira a seductive glance, which made her shiver several times. However, the thought that she was just a programmed NPC made her feel a bit of empathy. Her usual room is next to the kitchen, a worker's room. The cook and the guard are a pair, living together. The players' rooms are all on the second floor, and the third floor is a couple of foreign-blooded castle owners. The male protagonist's name is David, a handsome man with golden hair and a cold personality. He often conducts experiments in the basement and occasionally goes upstairs to sleep. Chili has never seen him appear since awakening. The hostess's name is Tsueshi, with a beautiful face and a hot figure. Her emerald green eyes are full of mystery, and she wears a head of long red curly hair. She is warm and hospitable. The 7 guests this time were also recommended by her friends for vacation. Chili sighed, and last night, after learning her identity, she tried to leave the castle area and go to the home in her memory. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get out of the range of the castle, even the iron gate that led to the outside world couldn't pass through. After trying a few times, she gave up. The dinner has already begun, and she is hiding in the kitchen with her rice bowl, eating her carefully cooked Sichuan cuisine while listening to the faint laughter and conversation coming from the restaurant. After a while, the cook knocked on the door and walked in with a smile on her face. "Dear Akira, the dishes you make are loved by the guests," she said. "My wife couldn't help but praise me." "Oh, is Madam also dining at the restaurant?" "That's for sure," the cook said as she put her portion of food into the insulated food box. As she picked up the box and passed by Akira, she gently caressed the corner of her mouth with her chubby fingers and said, "There's a grain of rice at the corner of her mouth." A pair of squinted eyes showed a strong sense of love. Chili trembled all over and was stunned. The cook saw her appearance and walked away with a coquettish smile, taking small steps. As she recovered, the banquet in the restaurant was still in progress. She walked outside and quietly looked at the group through the glass. Out of the 7 players, 6 have Western faces and 1 woman has Eastern faces. Except for a white man who is middle-aged, all other players look very young. They seem to be very interested in the history of the castle, and the topic always leads in this direction. Akira watched as the hostess, Tracy, answered the guests' questions while proficiently enjoying Chinese food with knives and forks. Chili felt a sense of discord in front of her. As she was about to leave, Tracy suddenly looked at her with a smile on her lips and blinked at her. Chili was taken aback. Tsueshi's beauty is also rare on the main star, and her original memory is missing many things. Is it possible that she has a good relationship with Tsueshi? She quickly left and returned to her small room. After a simple wash, I took off my work clothes. She looked up at herself in the mirror, with thick black curly hair, a melon-seed face, a pointed nose, thick and long eyebrows, and a pair of dark brown eyes with a hint of heroism. He is 1.72 meters tall and has clear lines on his arms when cooking all year round. Without a doubt, she is a healthy cook. This appearance is much more spirited than when she was on the main star. Although the room was small, everything was available. She opened the window and breathed air into the room. This is facing the back garden, with shrubs distributed under the windowsill. Not far away, roses are in full bloom, and the air is very fresh on early summer nights. A mysterious moon hangs in the sky, and you can still hear the murmur of summer insects. Unfortunately, these were all fake, and she sighed again. She took out a book from her pillow, which was the original one. It was a love novel that told the story of a man eloping for his beloved girl. There was no entertainment, no phone, and she could only read to pass the time. Unconsciously, the night was getting dark. Rubbing her eyes, she put away the book and got up to close the window a little. Suddenly, a sobbing sound came from the bushes below. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Friends. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Friends. When she was feeling nervous, the hostess Tracy appeared under the windowsill. She made a shush gesture with her index finger and quickly lifted her foot over the bushes, while reaching out to Autumn Pear. Chioli instinctively pulled on her, and with this force, Tsueshi exerted an upward force and bent down into her small room. A fresh fragrance that had just been bathed rushed into her nose, and Tsueshi was wearing a black low-cut nightgown, with a beautiful figure that could be seen without a trace. The window was closed by her backhand, and then she lunged into Akira's arms with an arrow step. Autumn Pear alarm clock masterpiece, this one is not even present in the memories of the original body. In order to maintain balance, she wrapped her hands around her waist and a few lines of text suddenly appeared in front of her. A nightgown that can charm men. No man can resist its temptation unless you are not a man. Maintenance time. Half an hour, cooling time. 24 hours, usage. Until it is damaged. Fortunately, I am not a man. She gently touched the material of the clothes with her fingers, and her heart was racing. I only heard a choking voice from the woman lying on her shoulder, and at the same time, I turned my tearful little face to look at Chioli. Sister Xiaoli, what should I do? You are my best friend. No one in the castle can understand me, so I can only talk to you. Chioli quickly put away her shock and looked at her with the expression that her best friend should have. Tell me what happened. What happened to make people love you? Flowers bloom. My beautiful sister is so distressed. At the same time, don't forget to extend Qian's long fingers to wipe away the tears from her face. David has changed. He said he will always love me, but during this time, he has been working in the basement, and even when he gets tired, he just rests there. I have been sleeping alone for a week now. Sure enough, Akira's comforting words had some effect. She stopped crying and began to explain to Akira in a low voice. In his heart, work is more important than me. She sighed lightly and left Akira's embrace. Chioli regretfully released her hands. Since this prop belongs to a good friend, let it go. After all, it is her own person. Listening to Tracy's complaints again, she suddenly felt a warmth, that in this strange world, there was a friend who listened to her nagging about family matters. If she hadn't heard the screams coming from upstairs 10 minutes later, it would have been a wonderful night. Tsueshi suddenly stood up from the only chair in the small room, pressing her ear close to the door. Chioli thought to herself that the horror game had finally started. She whispered to Tracy, it should be a guest. I'll go out and take a look. Don't go back to your room. After I go out, you can go find David. There must be something more proactive between husband and wife. Tsueshi nodded, although still looking confused, obediently retreated to the side. Akira is the only child on the main star and has always longed for a younger sister. Finally, she realizes what it feels like to have a cute and beautiful sister. With some reluctance, she opened the door and walked upstairs. Chioli walked to the entrance of the second-floor hallway and suddenly froze. Why did she bother with this situation? Is it okay for her to keep going? Just as she was about to leave quietly, she was discovered by a female player with the only Eastern face standing in the hallway. She called out coquettishly, "Beauty, come over here, I'm afraid." Chioli shivered and thought to herself, I'm also afraid of you talking to me in this tone. She withdrew her steps and walked over with a worried expression. The players were all gathering at the entrance of room 202, where a man with brown hair and bare feet squatted at the door with red eyes. The other few people were whispering something to him. Since she woke up, she hasn't had a chance to search the second floor yet. It's good to take this opportunity to take a look. The girl who stopped her immediately met him as he walked over, reached out and grabbed her arm, making a look of dependence on her. The other few people stopped talking and silently looked at her. She vaguely felt that the atmosphere was a bit cautious. I heard a voice, "Come and take a look," she explained curiously. Walking to the door, she shook off the girl's hand while checking the situation. Room 202 is the second room in the corridor, and you can see it all at a glance. There are 2 single beds, both messy, and a European-style window is now half open. A white man lay motionless on the ground, with no weapons or bloodstains around him, topless. She trembled as she approached, and the cat lowered its waist and placed its fingers under his nose, without any breathing. "What's going on?" She turned her head and asked the man squatting on the ground with red eyes. They always chat together during meals, and it's obvious that they are teammates. Judging from his sad expression, it's highly likely that they also know each other in the real world. Maybe it's because Jacques had a heart attack, and as we rushed over, it was already like this, the only middle-aged man explained. The man with red eyes remained silent, seemingly agreeing. In Akira's vague memory, there have been several times when she used templates to handle such scenes. "Don't touch him for now. After the phone in our castle is restored, we'll call the police and resolve the issue. This room won't be occupied for now." She looked down at the deceased's roommate squatting on the ground with a hint of sadness and said, "This guest, you can squeeze in with the other guests. There are only 4 rooms in total, and there are 3 girls. One of them is the one who is alone, the one with an Eastern face. We can't let 1 man and 1 woman stay in 1 room. He can only be squeezed with one of the 2 rooms outside. One of the settings is that the phone line is broken. In addition, the castle is located among the mountains and transportation is inconvenient. There is a minibus that delivers supplies once a week, which means even if they want to leave, they have to wait for a week." As she spoke, she searched around the room, seeming to be looking for suspicions, but in reality, she was only touching props. Unfortunately, there is nothing to be gained in this room. Under the watchful gaze of everyone, she went downstairs and faintly heard a girl with an Eastern face inviting her to stay in her room with a flat head. This girl is alone, and now she's also single. It's a good idea to be together. Unfortunately, these players are in a hostile camp with her. She remembered the nightmares she had experienced before, and for some reason, the surviving players would come to kill her, as she was just a harmless chef. Returning to the room, Tracy had already left. Feeling drowsy surged up, and as soon as I stuck onto the bed, I fell asleep soundly. She slept until early in the morning, and her body clock was on time. She stretched lazily, got up from bed, finished washing up, changed into work clothes, and a cool and upright cook was about to go out and prepare breakfast. I made a sandwich for breakfast and served coffee and milk as drinks. When the cook came in, she whispered to her, "Dear Chioli, have you heard? A customer died of a heart attack. It's so scary." "Has this kind of thing happened before?" Akira asked calmly. The cook was stunned for a moment, as if she had crashed without making a sound. Akira quickly took a step back and kept a safe distance from her. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Guard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Guard. After a moment, the cook let out a long sigh and answered with some sadness, "I don't know why, this kind of thing always happens." She shook her head, seeming to shake off unhappy memories. "Remembering these terrible things doesn't benefit us much, do you think so, dear Akira?" She then stared at Akira without blinking. Chioli felt a chill surge from her feet to her head, and in that moment, she almost thought even the cook had awakened. She replied calmly, "Isn't that right? It's better to remember more beautiful things. Terrifying things will only slow down my cooking speed." Listening to her teasing, the cook's eerie face regained a smile and whispered to Akira again, "Dear Akira, have you heard? A customer died of a heart attack, it's so scary. Chioli was taken aback and looked at the cook who seemed to have been restarted in front of her, feeling a bit scared. Don't tell me about this kind of thing in the future, I just want to cook a good meal, Akira said as she distanced herself from her and placed the brewed coffee on the dining car. The cook nodded quickly and said, yes, it's too scary. It's better not to discuss it. Watching the figure of the cook pushing the dining cart out, Akira picked up her breakfast in her hand and started eating it in large gulps. The aroma of coffee wafts indoors, and after taking a sip, the mellow and bitter taste echoes in the mouth. This somewhat alleviated her anxiety. No one can understand her sadness. Her muscular lines are just data, these despicable yet beautiful illusions. After eating breakfast and drinking coffee, her mood also eased a lot. Suddenly, she thought of a key question. Who else knows about being best friends with the hostess? Sueshi saw that she still had to climb the window. It seems that Tracy's family status is not high either. As the cook who had gone out to deliver the meal was coming back, she quickly dodged out. She didn't want to deal with this data person yet. The cook and the guard are a pair, but they have no memory of what the guard looks like. It's better to take 100 steps after dinner and go to the guard room to touch them. With a turn of footsteps, I turned from the road towards the hall to the small door on the side of the corridor. This is a small path leading to the outdoors. After about 10 minutes, it arrived at the end, with two black iron doors facing each other standing at the towering wall, looking somewhat imposing. The guard room is located on the right side of the iron gate, connected to the wall. The door to the guard room was closed, and she peered in from the window. The layout inside was similar to the school's reception room, with one table and one chair, and a registration manual placed on the table. There is also a door on the inside, which should be the place where the cook and the guard rest. A huge castle, usually the kitchen lady does the miscellaneous work inside the castle, and the gatekeeper is not only responsible for looking at the gate, but also for greening the walls. She looked around as no one was around, stretched out her arm and took the registration manual from the table into her hand. This notebook records the list of visitors for 6 months, and the registration is very neat. It seems that this gatekeeper is very responsible. As he flipped through it, he was somewhat surprised as he looked at the final notes on these lists, especially the middle few pages. On March 1st, Zhongba boarded 7 guests and arrived at the castle. Zhang Xiaofeng, note. Died of heart disease on March 2nd, Mike, note. Died of self-hanging on March 3rd, Huang Sanlang, note. Died from drowning on March 6th, Li Xiaojing, note. On March 7th, take a minibus to leave the castle. Just 7 days ago, one person died every day in the first 3 days. On the 4th day, there was no beginning. On the 7th day, only one person escaped. The visit records for other dates are similar, but there are also players who have all escaped. Most players are in groups of 7, and there are also 8 players. Customers come here once a month, which means she will have a lot of free time when this group of customers leaves. At the beginning of March, these 7 people looked somewhat like standard templates, and the outcome of their deaths should be fixed. She recorded this order. Flipping the registration manual to the latest page casually, as she was about to carefully read it, a whistling wind came from behind her ear. She quickly turned her head, but did not completely avoid it. Her head was in severe pain, and she fell to the ground in response. When I woke up again, I opened my eyes and saw the chubby face of the cook. The originally vague brain suddenly regained some clarity. The cook said coquettishly, "My dear Chioli, you finally woke up." Early in the morning, "What are you doing in the guard room?" asked her in a coquettish tone, while her eyes remained unblinking. Her hair stood up and she touched the back of her head, which was still a bit painful. She sat up and quickly glanced at the surrounding decorations. It looked unfamiliar here, but the door looked the same as the one from the previous window. This should be the guard's bedroom. She put down her hand and looked bewildered. "I came here for a walk and saw no one in the guard room." A notebook fell at the door, so I picked it up and looked at it. What happened? Why is my head so painful? The cook had almost no doubt, and a sweet smile appeared on her face again. She squeezed her eyes into two slits and said, I see. I just came back to pick up something and saw you lying on the ground. Is there something hidden in your body? She put her chubby hands over and placed them on Akira's right hand, saying, My dear Akira, you should have a good checked up. Chili hurriedly got out of bed, casually put her shoes on her feet, stood up straight and said, I'm doing well. She even let out a disdainful snort. As she walked out of the bathroom, she turned her head to look at the cook who followed her out, feeling a bit embarrassed. Her attitude just now didn't seem like it should be for someone who took care of her. She whispered her gratitude and casually asked, Why haven't you seen the gatekeeper all this time? The cook covered her mouth with her hand and happily accepted her gratitude. When she heard the last sentence, she immediately curled her lips and said, Where can he go? Make a trap in the forest behind him. Her plump index finger pointed towards the forest behind the castle near the wall. Why set a trap? It won't hurt the guests, will it? Akira quickly asked. We need to protect ourselves, said the cook with a rare seriousness on her face. As soon as she finished speaking, she quickly took a few steps and reached out to grab Chili's arm, saying, Oh my, we need to make lunch now. Hurry up and go back, the guests are in a hurry. Then I'll hurry back first. You can follow me slowly, there's me in the kitchen. Akira hurriedly pulled out her right hand and ran forward, with the cook's happy laughter coming from behind. At noon, she cooked Cantonese food. She also stewed a pot of gastrodia alata chicken soup. She wanted to make up her dizzy head. She also cooked fish head jelly pot, soup watercress, salted fish steamed meat cake, cured meat little pan rice. The ingredients in the kitchen are amazing, she can find everything she wants. If it could be worn back, it would be even better. Train your cooking skills well here. She remembered when she competed for a position at the main star hotel. Despite having better culinary skills than another male chef, she still lost her noble position as a kitchen supervisor by 1 point of error. In the following years, she simply resigned and opened her own private restaurant, which can be considered as going through many things. I don't know if the private restaurant will close down after I pass through. Rubbing the back of her head, which still felt a bit painful, she pulled her thoughts back. This strange world is not completely useless, at least the kitchen is still YYDS. She divided and packed several dishes with all their colors, flavors, and waited for the cook to come and pick them up. Leaning in front of the desk, she first filled herself with a bowl of soup. The delicious aroma of chicken soup combined with the traditional Chinese medicine flavor of tianma mixed together, making her vaguely return to her time on the main star. After taking a sip, she gritted her teeth in the scorching heat, but felt the beauty of the food. Let's live well for now. She doesn't want to die tragically like her original self once a month. As the awakening time lengthened, she vaguely felt that if she could ensure survival in every game segment, there might be some unexpected benefits. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Clues. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Clues. If according to the content recorded by the security guard, there should be someone hanging themselves today. She doesn't know the information that the player knows, is the so-called love castle literally explained. So it's related to love. At present, it seems that players are also forming factions and guarding each other. Even if you inquire about the news, you can only wait for the opportunity. If it's related to love, then the castle owner Tracy and David are the most suspected, along with the cook and the gatekeeper, who are also a pair. Chili put down the good dishes and put them into the sink. Looking out from the kitchen window, there is a forest behind. I heard the cook say that the gatekeeper is setting traps in the forest. From this angle, she looked at this forest and suddenly felt a movement in her heart. If he were in this forest, then he could monitor his every move. Or maybe he's just monitoring the cook. Is it David or the gatekeeper who knocked himself unconscious in the morning? Are you trying to kill yourself, or are you just preventing yourself from checking the registration book? Chili felt that since she found out she was in the dungeon, her reverence for life had decreased significantly, including the deaths of players and NPCs, which seemed to be just a piece of data. She watched the fire from afar and remained unusually calm. But that stick this morning really hurt. We can't just treat this world as data. After all, it's oneself who hurts. She stared at the forest, continuing to ponder. Last night, Tracy mentioned that David hasn't been back to the bedroom for a week, and the cook always looks disdainful when talking about the security door. And since crossing over, I haven't met that strange security guard before. This is absolutely unreasonable. She carefully searched through her memories, trying to find some clues. The cook's cheerful voice came from behind. "My dear Akira, I'm here to pick up lunch." Her lunch with the gatekeeper was also prepared by Akira. Chili turned around and asked, "Have Madam and Sir eaten before?" "Madam has eaten it, and Madam said she will personally deliver it to you." "They are really affectionate, aren't they?" The cook sighed with envy. "Have you been busy lately, sir?" "I haven't seen anyone. Have you seen him?" "Mr. is conducting an experiment in the basement, and I haven't seen him for a long time, dear Akira. I'll go back first." After saying that, the cook picked up the lunch box and walked out. Chili turned around and continued to look at the forest. In early summer, there were constant insect calls and occasional bird calls in the trees. The kitchens have all walked away, and there is still no trace of people in the forest. She walked to the staircase and looked down, the basement door tightly closed. With a gaze fixed on her, she looked up and saw the middle-aged male player. He smiled elegantly and walked out quickly from the corner of the second floor, saying, "My name is John." "How do you call me?" "Hello John, my name is Chili." Chili showed a sincere expression. "Are you looking at the basement?" "Are you looking for David?" he asked. "John, are you friends with your husband?" Akira asked back. "We are Tracy's friends, and of course we are also David's friends." "Oh, sir, I haven't been to the dining hall recently. I'm a bit worried. Is my food not delicious?" Akira sighed lightly. John stared at her for a moment, then turned his head to look at the basement door with a slight smile on his lips. "Alternatively, let's go to the basement and see him. What do you think, Miss Akira?" Chili's heart moved, but she still stood in the same place, her expression a bit timid, and her voice a little quieter. "I dare not go. Since you are friends, why don't you go and ask for me?" John was taken aback and glanced at Chili again. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll go take a look." After going downstairs, John knocked on the door. Akira stood at the staircase and looked over. After a while, the door opened. It wasn't David who opened it, but Tracy. She was a little surprised that John would be here. "Dear John, why are you? Is there something wrong? I haven't seen David come out to have dinner together, and the beautiful chef is a bit worried." "Maybe her dishes don't taste right," John said politely. Sueshi looked up at Chioli at the staircase and smiled. "Don't worry, he just finished his meal and is very satisfied." After speaking, she looked at John apologetically and said, "David is still busy, so I won't invite you in." John returned to the stairwell and the basement door closed again. "Can I ask you to take a walk with me in the back garden? The food today was so delicious, I ate a bit too much." He smiled and invited Akira. "Okay, it's my pleasure." The roses in the backyard are in full bloom, and the tall trees on both sides of the path block the sunlight tightly. Although the early summer afternoon is a bit hot, it is very cool here. Along the way, Akira and John probed each other, and she finally figured out the names of the remaining 6 people and where they came from. Where they come from, Akira doesn't care, it must be a false identity given by the game. But what John asked her about is worth noting. I heard that David once had a beautiful confidante, Miss Akira. Have you seen her? Chili's thinking has been constantly revolving around the existing relationship between men and women, never realizing that there might be a third person. Upon hearing his question, he really gave a different perspective. I've heard of it too, but unfortunately I haven't seen it, she replied to his question. Tracy seems to care a lot about David. Well, after all, we've only been married for a year. This sentence went out almost without thinking, and Akira was stunned for a moment. This should be her original memory. Or perhaps this is the setting of the game. On the way back, at the junction of the garden and the forest, I met 5 other people who seemed to be assigning tasks. When they approached, their voices stopped. Autumn Pear and John are separated here. She returned to her own cabin, and John met them. Entering the cabin, she looked out the window and saw the group still in place discussing something. She quickly turned around and went out, heading straight towards the second floor. At the moment, they are all outside, so I can go and see where they live and see if there are any clues. Just chatted and learned that John lives in 203 with another young blonde man, Lawrence. He seems quite proactive and hopes to find clues in his place. As for opening the door, Akira silently took out the spare key from her arms. All the hygiene in the castle was done by the cook, and the cook's spare key was left in the kitchen. She saw it a few days ago. The guest has been checking in these days. As requested by the guest, the room cleaning has been stopped and the keys have been left untouched. Chili, who had never done such a thing before, discovered that she had a talent in this area and her movements were smooth and agile. No wonder others say it takes 3 years to learn well and only 3 days to learn poorly. Room 203 has the same interior decoration as room 202 next door, but it is even more messy. Bedclothes are piled on the bed at will. Some dirty clothes are put on the back of the chair. The suitcase is opened and placed on the tea table. There are clothes inside. She quickly walked forward and touched them one by one, but did not find any props. She found a small notebook under her pillow and opened it. This was the plot analysis written by the player, and if it really happened, she quickly flipped through it. They knew more about the plot than themselves, but it was also limited. David's predecessor was named Emma, and she vaguely felt that the name was very familiar. A thunderbolt came from outside, and she looked at the window. She had been too engrossed in her notes before, and before she knew it, the heavy rain had already fallen. Oh no, the rainy guests will definitely come back. The corridor was filled with noisy footsteps, and she looked around, unable to leave in time. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Emma. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Emma, John, Lawrence, and the other 3 parted ways unhappily, and as soon as they entered the room, they began to complain. John took out a notebook from his pocket and threw it onto the table. I worked hard to get the gatekeeper's registration book from the cook. I kindly shared the information with them. They don't want to say thank you, they're still acting weird. What a despicable thing. Lawrence's voice was much younger, with a hint of malice. Why didn't you kill that cook? John complained, I also want to. There's not enough time. That cook suddenly appeared. I had to come back with it first. What are the 4 of them really worried about? They should listen to our opinions and just kill all the NPCs. Lawrence walked into the restroom and closed the door, saying, anyway, let's not leave each other's sight tonight. They'll find out tomorrow. John squatted in front of the coffee table, finding some dry clothes to replace the wet clothes on his body. A gust of wind blew over, and the door opened. He shuddered and walked to the door, looking towards both sides of the corridor. The flat-headed man in room 205, diagonally opposite, was leaning against the door frame smoking. When he saw him looking over, he snorted coldly and threw the newly lit cigarette onto the ground, closing the door with a loud bang. John's face didn't look good and he said, "This damn weather." He shrank back into his room and locked the door with ease. Chioli, who was forced to go up the third floor, hid in the study. There was no one around. She took the cloth off her head and gasped for breath. Just now, John almost brushed past her, it was too scary. Just arrived at the hallway and saw a bald man smoking outside. She was really difficult, so she had to turn straight up to the third floor. This is David's study. His cat is currently in the basement, which is actually the safest place. Since everyone has arrived, let's just touch it. Chioli began to touch the mode, and there was a whole wall of books in the study. Chioli remembered that her own book was also borrowed here. Even though my hands felt the cocoon, I still found nothing. She pulled out the armchair and sat down, spinning around a few times. There was a photo frame on the desk, inside which was a photo of David and Tracy, looking very well matched. Akira casually held the frame in her hand and examined it. The photo frame was made of wood, and the buttons at the back were a bit loose. With a thought, she opened the back cover. A photo fell from the interlayer. In the photo, Tsueishi stands in front of the castle, raising her head and laughing heartily. Chioli was about to put away this photo when she suddenly froze for a moment. This is not Tracy, just a young woman with the same hair and eye color as Tracy. At a sudden glance, there was a slight similarity, and one would instinctively think it was Tracy. On the back of the photo, there is a line of words written. Emma, I love you. David's ex Emma. Autumn Pear stared at Emma in the photo, her brain tingling. The photo frame in her hand fell to the ground, and memories rolled in her mind. Finally, she remembered the reason why she became a chef in the castle. My close friend Emma went missing. According to her letter address, she arrived at the castle and successfully applied to become a chef. Her constant care for Tracy is also due to her resemblance to Emma. Chioli sighed and put the photo in her pocket, which can be considered as over 25% of the plot. I didn't expect that I was also one of the characters, not purely a passerby. When she went downstairs, she was very careful, as the rag was still in its cooling time. Finally, he returned to the small room without any danger. She sat on a small chair and began to analyze the whole story. John injured himself in the morning. Fortunately, he still had a lively conversation with himself this afternoon. These players are really shameless. The cook saved her own life. I owe her a debt. Find a chance to repay it. And Emma, where the hell did she go? It was almost dinner time, and she quickly changed into the chef's uniform and walked out of the small room. Coincidentally, I met the cook. She must have come in from outside and her left shoulder was wet. My dear Akira. Are we going to make dinner now? She quickly walked up and grabbed Akira's arm. Your shoulders are wet, go change your clothes quickly, Akira kindly reminded her. You really care about me the most. The cook coquettishly leaned her head towards Akira's shoulder. I'm going to cook, otherwise there won't be enough time. Akira gently pushed her head away and quickly ran into the kitchen, with the cook's coquettish laughter coming from behind. Autumn Pear looked at the familiar kitchen and her heart settled. Do you want to add some ingredients to the food for the guests? As for Tracy and David, she plans to personally deliver them to the basement later. Sure enough, the ingredients in the kitchen can be adjusted according to her preferences. She found a portion of croton beans and put them in moderation. These days, it seems that these customers are very fond of soup. On the contrary, the NPCs in the castle hardly touched the soup. The sound of rain outside the window gradually stopped, bringing a cool atmosphere. She made a soup with pepper, which was needed by the rain-drenched guests, she thought thoughtfully. Today's dinner was simpler, with egg bun rice, fried pork chops, and stir-fried vegetable hearts. In addition to leaving a warm portion for the cook and the gatekeeper, she also took out an exquisite food box and put Tracy and David's dinner inside. After the cook came in, Akira smiled and reminded, I've packed all the dishes. You got caught in the rain today, so I made ginger soup for you separately. Don't drink the soup from the guests. Also, let me deliver the meals for my wife and husband today. She picked up the food box and walked out. The cook's heart had already turned into a flower, so she drank the ginger soup first and then slowly went to deliver the meal. The sky had completely darkened, and the crystal lights in the hallway flickered a few times. Some players exclaimed in surprise, and Akira turned her head to take a look outside, holding her food box. The outside was pitch black, the light from the street lamps was completely blocked, and the wind blew through the windows making a sound. There was a somewhat eerie feeling, and Akira tightened the collar of the chef's uniform and quickened her pace. The basement door was still closed, and she gently knocked on it. It turned out to be David who opened the door this time. His eyes were bright red, his black circles were clearly visible, and his golden hair was messy. A pair of golden glasses with stains on the lenses, the clothes are clean and refreshing, and a white coat is open, revealing a light gray silk shirt inside. It's an autumn pear, David obviously breathed a sigh of relief. Come in. He stepped aside half of his body. A cold and gloomy aura surged from the direction of the basement. Although it rained in early summer and the temperature slightly decreased, it was not as cold as this. A strange smell lingered indoors. The basement was brighter than expected, with a large hall at the entrance. There were 2 doors at the end of the hall, one of which opened. Upon hearing the commotion, Tsueshi rubbed her eyes and walked out. The other door is half open, and you can vaguely see the instruments and equipment inside, which must be David's laboratory. Sister Xiaoli, why did you personally come to deliver the meal? Tsueshi yawned and walked to the long table, watching Chioli take out the dinner from the food box. I mainly came to see you and David, but I haven't seen him come out much, Akira replied casually. Xiaoli, I've been feeling very sleepy lately. As she spoke, her emerald green eyes seemed to have some moisture in them, looking pitifully at Chioli. Is it too cold? Have you caught a cold? Chioli was puzzled by the temperature below. Tsueshi wrapped her robe tightly and said, it seems like she has a cold. David next to him said, once communication is restored, I'll have the doctor come and take a look. Do you want to have dinner together? David sat next to Tracy and grabbed her hand, turning his head to look at Autumn Pear. No need, I'm just a little uneasy. Tracy came over to take a look and didn't disturb the world between you two. Akira smiled and blinked at her as she saw a blush on Tracy's face. The indoor temperature seems to be even lower. After Chioli left the basement, she found that the lights on the stairs had gone out. End of this chapter. Chapter 6, Second. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6, Second. With the faint light in the hallway, I turned my head to look at the basement, feeling as if it was shrouded in a vast black atmosphere. Go back to the kitchen and finish your dinner. Put the dishes into the sink and walk towards your own room. Standing in the small room, Akira looked at the seemingly unchanged decorations and quickly walked to the bedside, squatting down. The shape of the blanket was different. The position of the book under the pillow is also different. There's not a shortage of things. Fortunately she kept the photo close to her and it wasn't taken by anyone. She picked up the book and flipped through a few pages. The door was knocked on, and she casually threw the book onto the bed. At the door was the cook, holding a bouquet of daisies with dripping water on top. She said, Dear Autumn Pear, I picked it in the garden. Can I help you arrange the flowers? Chioli reached out to take it and said, It's really nice. I'll do it myself. The weather's not good, you go back quickly. Seeing her obediently turn around, she added, Remember to close the doors and windows tonight. The cook shook her chubby little hand and said in a cheerful voice, Okay, I'll go back first. See you tomorrow. Close the door. Chioli went to wash up first, changed into pajamas, and lay on the bed. She casually held a book in her hand, and a red maple leaf drifted down from it. Autumn Pear caught it effortlessly. The light suddenly went out. A gust of cold wind blew over, causing Chioli to shiver. At the same time, a line of words appeared before my eyes. Emma's dwelling place, a soul abandoned by its lover, sticking it to its forehead, her sorrow can make creatures within a radius of 3 meters shed tears endlessly, effective time. 1 minute, cooling time. 12 hours, usage. As long as the place of residence is not damaged. Emma. After her memory revived, she looked at the name again and her senses were different, with a hint of sadness and warmth. Looking at this explanation again, being betrayed by your lover. Is it David who starts in chaos and ends in abandonment? Soul state, which means she's already dead. A sense of sadness surged in my heart for no reason, and uncontrollable tears flowed down, which were remnants of my original obsession. Chili felt a bit flustered and reached out to press the light switch, but there was no response. Wiping away tears, smearing black and putting on shoes, I quickly opened the door and looked out. Sure enough, the entire castle was pitch black. Noise came from the second floor. Not long after, it quieted down again. She locked the door and lay back in bed, and soon her eyes adapted to the darkness. She has flipped through this book countless times, but has never found any maple leaves. Is it because she first had a photo, so this is a chain plot? With a grit of her teeth, she pressed the maple leaf onto her forehead. She is the only creature in a radius of 3 meters, so it seems to be an indiscriminate attack prop. She looked at the transparent soul in front of her with tears streaming down her face, and Emma seemed to recognize her. Chili choked and asked her, "Time is limited, I'll ask you a question. How did you die?" The transparent Emma stood up straight, looking at Akira with a hint of confusion on her face. "Am I dead? Damn it." Surprisingly a confused ghost, Akira let out a mournful cry in her heart. How could this question continue? "Akira, I had an argument with David, so I hid." She reached out and touched Akira's cheek. "Are you here to find me?" Her hands were cold with some moisture in them, and Chili shuddered coldly. "Yes, I came specifically to find you." "After the argument, where did you hide?" She wiped away the tears from her face, and new tears continued to flow down. "In the forest, it's the maple leaf forest." "How could I be here? Am I really dead?" She looked down at her body. What else does Chili need to ask? After a minute, tears stopped and Emma's figure disappeared. She ran to the bathroom and washed her face in the darkness. The chilly atmosphere in the air was even stronger, and she found a thick coat in the dark to wrap herself tightly. Lying in bed, she placed the maple leaves and a cloth close to her body. Although the maple leaves were not of much use, they were better off than expected. The sadness in my heart has almost disappeared. It seems that my original obsession has completely dissipated after seeing Emma. Lying in bed, under the warmth of the bedding, she gradually fell asleep. In room 205 on the second floor, the bald man Johnson sat up from the toilet for the last time, and his stomach reaction had already subsided. His roommate Li Xiaolin, who shared the same room, gave him medication that worked. He touched the deflated abdomen and pressed the flush button. The bathroom was very dim, and there were branches outside the window that were rustling in the wind. He pinched the comb in his arms and felt calm in his heart. The candle flickered as he washed his hands and looked up at the mirror. His face was pale, with a hint of wax yellow. Shaking his head, he reached out to take the candle, and in the remaining light, he noticed that his reflection in the mirror had changed. He suddenly took a step back. A familiar face appeared in the mirror and exclaimed, "Jacques." Water vapor has been permeating the bathroom since, and the surrounding air has become cold and gloomy. "Why didn't you save me?" Jacques' face contorted slightly, his expression mixed with sadness and anger. "You have a double prop." Johnson hesitated to speak, but his mind was like a paste, his thoughts almost froze, and guilt surged towards him like a tide. He and Jacques are also good friends in reality, but even the best friends are not worth him using substitute props, which is his life-saving means. "You're just like them, both hypocrites." Jacques' figure in the mirror flickered, somewhat unreal. He reached out his hand and said, "But I choose to forgive you. Show me your comb, my brother." Johnson vaguely felt something was wrong, but sadness and guilt occupied his mind. He placed a stunt prop, an inconspicuous hair comb, in front of the faucet. He looked at the comb and hesitated several times, wanting to pick it up again. "My brother, please let me dress you up. Look, she can't wait anymore." The flame of the candle was stained with water vapor and turned blue. Jacques took off the tie tied around his neck and handed it to Johnson. In Johnson's eyes, the surroundings had changed. The bachelor's party had ended, and a group of friends were teasing him. His best friend, Jacques, was holding a tie and smiling as he wanted to tie it for him. This is his wedding scene, and the bride is shyly waving at him not far away. His mood brightened up. Johnson smiled at the corner of his mouth and leaned his head over. The tie was fastened, and Jacques in the mirror snapped his fingers, "May your soul reach heaven." The water vapor gradually dissipated, and Li Xiaolin outside the restroom knocked on the door. "Johnson, how are you, Johnson? I want to use the restroom." The candle flames in the room flickered, and the bathroom door creaked open a crack. Johnson didn't come out, and Li Xiaolin suppressed her anger and continued to say in a good temper, "So I opened the door. Extend your hand and gently push the door." The candles in the room went out instantly, leaving only the candles in the bathroom emitting a faint white light. A hanging object pulled out a long shadow on the wall. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The kitchen has to run away. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The kitchen has to run away. Li Xiaolin suddenly saw this scene and immediately covered her mouth, suppressing the almost blurting exclamation. She stayed in place, hunched her body, leaned against the wall, and waited for her intense heartbeat to gradually ease. Suppressing her sensory discomfort, she walked forward and tiptoed to explore Johnson's body. She knew that his player level was higher than hers, and there were definitely many good things that couldn't be taken away from the game backpack, but those that were on him could still be searched. Take out a dagger, a lighter, and a pack of unpacked cigarettes. These require identification to determine if they are props. Alternatively, after the game ends, the system will issue a settlement. She put away everything, changed his direction, resolved her own affairs, raised a candle, and returned to the bedroom as if nothing had happened. According to the registration manual that John received, Johnson should be the chosen victim and he is safe tonight. She took a deep breath and glanced at the bathroom. The door was still tightly closed. Johnson had been snoring these past few days, but she didn't sleep well. Now she can catch up on her sleep. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Julie woke up with her biological clock on time, and the electricity had been restored. She washed up and changed into a chef's uniform. The player has not made any progress until now, which is somewhat unusual. In theory, it should have been clear last night and I am now on guard. She thought to herself, it would be better if John had the problem, who would let this old boy deceive her. Breakfast was made very simply, with boiled eggs and bacon. After finishing it, I took out several cooked eggs, took out a bag of bread, and stuffed 3 bottles of mineral water into a canvas bag. If the players upstairs reach a consensus, clear the field first, kill all the NPCs, and prepare yourself in advance. I don't want to be killed, nor do I want to kill. She picked up the sharpest steak knife in the kitchen and steadily inserted it into the wide waistband of her chef's uniform. At the same time, silently reciting in my heart. All data, all data. Today, let's go find a place to get married. As for whether the guests have anything to eat, she doesn't have to worry about it. The freezer in the kitchen has fingerprints, it's a magical freezer with everything she wants inside. Even if the cook wants to take something, she must get her approval. I wonder what they would think if they found out they can't open the refrigerator. If it were to be demolished with violence, she glanced at the refrigerator. The cabinet door of the refrigerator was tightly sealed, and the whole cabinet was like a hole, full of a sense of technology. It was a pity that it was damaged to some extent. The kitchen is her territory, but at this moment, it should be the most dangerous place. After all, there are still 3.5 days left, and food will also be the object of their competition. The cook walked in through the side door, her chubby face a bit nervous. After finishing her breakfast, she whispered to Akira, "Dear Akira, I feel something is wrong." There was a commotion coming from upstairs, indicating that the body had been found. "I was just about to tell you, these days, you don't have to go deliver meals anymore. I cooked more eggs and bacon, pack them up, and don't come over to the gatekeeper these days. Remember to hide them," Akira whispered to the cook. The cook's voice became even more tense. "What will the guests do? Don't worry about them, stay away from them. These customers are not good people." Akira didn't know how to explain, so she simply said, "Do you want to come with us?" The cook was worried. "I have a way to save my life, take care of yourself and don't let me worry." Akira pinched her chubby face, a gesture she had been wanting to do for a long time. Who wouldn't like to pinch her chubby face? 2 red clouds rose on the cook's face. Akira has confirmed that the gatekeeper is not an important character in the plot, so let him go. The cook packed breakfast and was about to ask a question when Akira quickly left with a canvas bag in hand. On the second floor, the remaining 5 players are led by John. In room 205, on the ceiling of the bathroom, a tie hanging from the exhaust fan was cut by him, and Johnson was dragged to the bedroom, lying on his back on the ground. John touched it once and didn't find anything. He looked at Li Xiaolin with some suspicion and said, "You didn't notice Johnson didn't go back to bed all night?" Li Xiaolin trimmed her long black hair and felt a little uneasy. "He has been staying in the bathroom, saying that his stomach is a bit uncomfortable, and I'm not good at staring and asking questions all the time. Later on, I fell asleep and really didn't hear anything." John and Lawrence took turns pulling all night, feeling somewhat weak. He thought the food was not clean, but found that the 3 female players who were eating together were all fine, but it was the 3 men who were also feeling unwell in their stomachs. Chili only added ingredients to the spicy soup, and the female players who didn't like the spicy soup didn't drink it, so they luckily saved their physical strength. There is very little information about this dungeon in the player forum, and the strategy for this dungeon, which has been rated as D.level, has not been found on the entire network. The brown-haired female player Selena and her roommate, the yellow-haired female player Ada, immediately looked at each other. Selena was older and stood up. "Let's discuss what to do next. Let's share all the information we know." Love Castle, as the name suggests, is the key between the female protagonist and the male protagonist. John frowned and ordered, "Divide the army into 2 paths. Lawrence and Selena will go upstairs to deal with Tracy, Ida and I will go to deal with David in the basement, and as for Li Xiaolin." He stared into Li Xiaolin's eyes and said, "Go to the kitchen, find some food and drink. If you see the chef, kill her." Li Xiaolin asked timidly, "I heard that the chef is also a key role. Can I not do it alone?" John disapproved and said, "I've tested her before, she's just an insignificant NPC. Don't tell me you don't have any props. You're not a beginner, afraid of a yarn." Selena hesitated a bit and said, "Kill directly. I remember the score would be very low, and some would even deduct points. If it's that kind of thing, at least you need to find it first. I heard there are many bonus points." Ada said, "This is just a D.level dungeon. We don't need to get into a fight with the NPC from the beginning. It's better to go ahead and get some clues." Selena added, "We've been talking to Tracy the other day, and I realized she doesn't know anything. The key person shouldn't be her." Lawrence gave a sinister smile and said, "Then, according to John's words, divide the army into 2 routes, use Klitsch AS first, and if it's not worth it, just kill it." Selena and Ada exchanged glances and agreed to the decision. John said coldly, "Let's go. When things are done, we'll meet in the lobby and exchange information." In the morning, although the outdoor rain stopped, it was still cloudy and looked like bad weather. At the entrance of the basement, John lightly knocked on the door, and it creaked open. John was somewhat surprised, as the door seemed to be in disrepair for a long time. Even though he came yesterday, it was still incredibly lubricated. "John and Ada, why are you here so early? What's up? Come in and sit down." David's eyes were red, and his black circles were still noticeable. It seemed like he had just woken up, with his hair messy and sticking to his head. He walked up to the dining table and personally brewed a pot of coffee. John gave Ada a glance, and at the end of the hall, both doors were open. It was obvious that David was the only one here. He pulled David aside to chat, while Ada on the other side walked quickly towards the laboratory. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Tears to the Face. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Game Theory. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Game Theory. In the lobby of the first floor, Selena and her companions waited for about half an hour, but still did not see John and Ada coming out. I feel a faint unease in my heart. Lawrence had regained consciousness and was puzzled by his own actions. His face was gloomy, and he clenched his fingers on the handle of the chair. Due to face saving, I couldn't bear to explain to Selena about letting Tracy go. Selena looked at the clock in the hall and her concern for Ada reached its peak. She suddenly stood up and said, "No, I need to go to the basement to take a look." Lawrence withdrew his dagger again and said, "Let's go together." He glanced at Li Xiaolin diagonally and said, "You go too." Li Xiaolin had to grit her head and follow behind them, picking up a dagger from Johnson's body at some point. Just as I walked to the entrance of the basement, the door suddenly slammed open, thick fog surged, and Ada fell out in embarrassment. After a moment, John, holding his left arm, also stumbled out. Immediately, the door closed again. A few people looked at each other, and Selena quickly stepped forward to help Ada up. She whispered, "What happened?" John twisted his face in pain and said, "Get out of here first." A few people didn't continue to delay and walked towards the hall. Ada sat next to Selena and began to tell them about her recent experience. John dragged David, and I took a look around the laboratory. Inside were various glass containers, just like we do chemical experiments. There were alcohol stoves, many plants similar to herbs, and animal fur, which had a slightly pungent odor. There were 3 medicinal liquids on the workbench, and I walked over to pick up one of them. She paused for a moment and looked at John, then I found that the room was full of fog, and I couldn't see the direction clearly. Then I was inexplicably thrown out. "John, do you know what happened?" John hesitated a bit. His left arm and wrist were dislocated, and Lawrence rudely connected them. His face cramped in pain, and he gritted his teeth and hissed. After waiting for a while and the pain subsided, I gently twisted my wrist and began to describe. I asked David about Emma, and he was a bit surprised. He thought it was Tracy who discovered Emma's presence and told us. Instead, he kept asking me back, "How much does Tracy know?" Just after Ada entered the laboratory, something was wrong in the room. At first, I was only focused on asking questions and didn't pay attention. Mist came out of the corner and grew more and more. David's face suddenly turned pale and scared, and he reached out to grab me. I thought he was going to kill me. I instinctively stabbed him with a small knife, but he seemed to be a different person with great strength and quick reaction. He avoided my knife and instead grabbed my arm, dislocating my arm and wrist with just one hand. John blushed and said, "Everything else is like what you've seen, we've been kicked out." Ada added, "I don't think David wants to kill us, otherwise we wouldn't be able to escape." Her expression was somewhat conflicted. We underestimated the enemy too much, but I'm sure that the unknown killer must be closely related to David. John added, "Besides, we can't engage in close combat against David. A few people gathered together and continued to murmur softly, discussing the next plan. Chioli was a bit worried about Tsueshi's condition. After letting her rest, she listened to the silence in the hallway and quietly left the door. The scene seen at the corner happened to be when the players came out of the basement. When they arrived at the lobby, they crouched down and returned to their small room on the first floor. I took a board of cold medicine from the bedside table and then took out a needle and thread box. In the hall, several people were talking when someone's stomach let out a cry. "I'm hungry, Li Xiaolin. Have you found what you ate?" John suddenly asked, touching his empty stomach. "The refrigerator in the kitchen can't be opened, we need the chef's fingerprints." Li Xiaolin answered timidly. "Let's go take a look." They stood up and walked towards the kitchen. The kitchen room is fully equipped with electrical appliances, the countertop is shiny, and there are a few onions and garlic on the ground. A high-tech refrigerator stands out and occupies half of the kitchen wall. John pulled the door hard, but the refrigerator door remained motionless. A line of text flashed across the LCD screen. "Please enter your fingerprint." Lawrence angrily smashed the refrigerator door, causing his hand to ache. "Damn it, where's the chef?" Li Xiaolin quickly answered, "I haven't seen her for a long time. I've also visited her room, but she's not there." Selena took out a metal plate and tried to insert it into the gap of the refrigerator door. It was unknown what material the refrigerator was made of, and the entire door was perfectly sealed. Although the metal plate was already very thin, the gap could not be found. A few people looked at each other, especially the two men who had stomach problems last night. Their stomachs were now empty and they couldn't bear it anymore. John took a sip of water and became even more hungry. "This castle is just so big, and we didn't see her even when we came downstairs. She should be outdoors. Let's go and find the cook and the others first." John calmed down and analyzed. "Don't ask questions this time, we don't have an advantage in numbers. It's better to take action first, but don't be too kind," John said, staring at Lawrence's face. Lawrence blushed and pointed to the refrigerator, saying, "It's just fingerprints. If you find her, try it one finger at a time and it will always open." Ada couldn't bear it, she understood what this male player meant. The dungeon world was not charity, and even though she felt cruel, she would still do what she needed to do. John glanced at them and took the lead in walking out. In the small room next to the kitchen, Akira didn't expect them to come to the kitchen right now. Listening to the commotion coming from next door, my heart was pounding with fear that they might suddenly open the door and come in. The cloth in my hand was ready to be draped over my head at any moment. Seeing them gradually leaving the kitchen, I finally breathed a long sigh of relief. The players appeared outdoors, and her cat lowered its waist and quickly ran back to the second floor. In the following time, she planned to persevere and suddenly understood why in her memory, as a chef, she always encountered misfortune. The fingerprint lock on the refrigerator may seem like a privilege, but it is also a disaster, especially for players who have become indifferent to human nature. A living chef is not as real and safer as a fingerprint. Opening the door of room 202, Tracy is not in the room. There is a note on the chair where she was originally resting. "Little David will take me to the basement. You can also come to the basement to take shelter. Wait for you, Tracy." How did David know that Tracy was in room 202, and Akira was a bit confused. Perhaps this is some NPC privilege. Just this medicine. Forget it, let's give it another chance. She put away the note. Take out 2 half-neck tees, carefully stitch them together, and slowly sew them together with needle and thread. 10 minutes later, the broken part of the tie was sewn together for her, although the lines were crooked, they were still intact. Akira stared at the handwriting that reappeared in front of her. Ugly ties collected by witches. It can wrap around anyone's neck until death strikes. Usage. Just touch the other person's head with it. Cooling time. 24 hours, usage. As long as the witch is still there, it can be used continuously until it breaks again. Chili was overjoyed, and this should be the only weapon she could wield. As for who the witch was, no matter who she was, now this thing belongs to her. Carefully putting away her tie, she walked up to the window and looked out. There was a gap in the window, and she pulled hard, but couldn't close it because it was broken. The outdoor weather is still shrouded in haze, and in the forest, 5 players are scattered and walking towards it. Akira saw Lawrence's back, he was on the outermost edge. The trap set by the guard in the forest was broken by the prop in John's hand. He discovered a hidden cabin in the woods, and a few people gestured to encircle it. At the same time, the unsuspecting cook was walking towards the forest from the guard room, holding the bedding. During the new book period, please follow up and read, dear children, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. Substitute Props. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Substitute Props. Chili was anxious in her heart. Her plan was to keep it to herself, but the cook had saved her and was about to step into the players' area. My mind immediately heated up, and I forcefully pushed open the broken window. With a cloth wrapped around my head, the cat leaned out of the window and slid down the drain pipe to the outdoor ground. Chili cautiously took small steps and tried not to make any noise, trying to intercept the cook in front of her. Lawrence walked in the middle of the forest, with 3 female players on the left and John on the right, fanning towards the depths of the forest. The direction in which the cook walked was facing Lawrence. Chili rushed over after 1,000 hardships, and as she was about to touch the cook, she dared not speak loudly. She was about to approach and cover the cook's mouth to prevent her from exclaiming. The cook was stepping on a withered tree branch, which made a sound of breaking. Lawrence quickly turned his head to look, and at the moment he saw the cook, a cold smile appeared on his face. The dagger in his hand was shining coldly, and he didn't hesitate to charge towards the cook. The cook exclaimed in surprise and threw the bedding in her hand towards him, causing his body to flash and his feet to pause slightly. It's useless for Chili to intercept again, and she doesn't think she can escape the pursuit of players with her 3-legged skills. Between the lightning and flint, she took out the inconspicuous comb and quickly inserted it into the kitchen lady's towering hair. Almost instantly, Lawrence waved a dagger in his hand, and after a cold light, the cook let out a scream and fell to the ground, rolling his head to Akira's feet. Lawrence glanced proudly at the ground and loudly replied to John, who was inquiring in the distance, "It's the cook, don't come over, I've already solved it." Half of Chili's body was splattered with blood, almost falling to the ground. She trembled and tried to control herself, not letting her emotions collapse. She silently thought to herself, all data, all data. Immediately, an unnamed sense of loss surged in my heart. Isn't the comb a stunt prop? She mustered the courage to look at the cook, remembering that the comb was inserted perfectly by her. The comb was inserted between her hair and had been stained red with blood. Although it was only in time, Akira's tears were almost uncontrollable and flowed down her cheeks, giving her a clear understanding of the killing for the first time. She empathized with the sadness of being an NPC. She covered her mouth and slowly retreated, about to leave this place. The head under her feet suddenly rolled up, and she was startled. The head seemed to have found its direction and rolled to the position of the cook's body. As it was being pieced together, the hair comb slowly disappeared. The cook's face, covered in blood, suddenly opened her eyes. Holy crap! Chili's delicate body trembled with fear. At the same time, a warning that only existed in her mind was sounded, and the invisible time of the cloth had passed. As the cook's face was filled with surprise and she got up from the ground, Akira suppressed the disgust in her eyes and quickly stepped forward to cover the cook's mouth, which was about to scream. "They're still there, don't make a sound." Akira shivered again as she felt the slippery blood in her hand. The cook's head nodded desperately a few times. Chili silently glanced at her neck, almost without any trace. It was truly a masterpiece. A commotion came from the forest behind them, and the player found the guard, shouting loudly. The sound of branches breaking came one after another. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Akira grabbed the cook's hand and ran towards the castle. The gatekeeper restrained the players and they ran back to the castle without any danger. In the restroom of room 202, the cook cleaned all the bloodstains on her head, and her chubby face was filled with a sense of relief. In her understanding, it was Akira who saved her. Chioli changed into a new outfit, stared at the blood clothes that had been changed, and then looked at the cook. This way, she could have narrowly escaped death. Akira's heart has developed a great interest in the props of this world. The cook glanced out the window and then withdrew her gaze. Chioli asked, "The gatekeeper looks dangerous, are you worried?" "Don't worry, the forest is his territory." The cook looked confident. An hour later, Akira found thick smoke rolling outside, and with a cloth, she was ready to use. She carefully went upstairs and ran to the rooftop to look out. Not only were the small wooden houses in the forest demolished, but even the guard room at the entrance was swept away by the fire. It seems that the gatekeeper is more unlucky than unlucky. She returned to room 202 and glanced at the cook, who was already asleep. The cook should have lost too much blood and was a bit weak. Chioli relaxed her mood and suddenly felt exhausted. She was too nervous today, and after suddenly relaxing, her whole body felt weak. Unconsciously, Akira also fell asleep. Until the noise at the door woke her up. The players gathered in the corridor, discussing. The guard was not caught by them, but according to their instructions, he was injured. Chioli glanced at the cook, but she still slept soundly. The quality of her sleep truly impressed Chioli. I glanced at my watch and it was already 2:30 p.m. The sound at the door continues. John's voice was the loudest. We've only found 5 eggs and 3 pieces of bread in total. We'll stay here for 3 more days. Each of the 5 people will share 1 egg, but the bread can only be given to me and Lawrence. After all, we're men and have a bigger appetite. Ada's voice was a bit vague. But the food was what I found. Selena's voice was resolute. No, Ida and I also want bread. We have put in as much effort as you. 3 pieces of bread, we only need 1. Okay, let's divide the bread among the 4 of us. John's voice couldn't hear any joy or anger, it seemed that they had automatically blocked Li Xiaolin. Li Xiaolin did not express any opinions from beginning to end. Perhaps in her heart, it was an unexpected joy that her companions could share an egg with her. Selena's voice rang out again. Ada, let's eat the food before we go in and rest. The food was eaten in front of the others, and even if they changed their minds afterwards, it was useless. Lawrence snorted coldly, and after a moment, the sound of door closing came from the next door. Li Xiaolin's voice suddenly sounded, "Sisters, can I stay with you?" "No, there are only 2 beds, not enough to live in." Selena swallowed her last bite of bread and coldly refused. Following is the sound of walking and closing the door. The corridor has completely quieted down. Chioli also felt hungry. She took out a boiled egg from a canvas bag, peeled it off, cut it into a flat round shape with a steak knife tied around her waist and sandwiched it into sliced bread. She, who is accustomed to food, eats a simple sandwich and drinks bland mineral water, which is somewhat unpleasant. She thought to herself that if the kitchen was really so advanced, the kitchen door should also be intelligent, allowing an excellent chef to cook with peace of mind, which is the correct way to start. Under the influence of delicious food, players and NPCs gradually break free from brutality. How beautiful it is. The sound of swallowing came from beside her, and Chioli turned her head to see that the cook had already woken up, looking eagerly at the sandwich in her hand. The boiled eggs and bread that the players just found should have been confiscated from the Lin Xiao house at the gatekeeper. So, Akira glanced at the sailcloth bag and asked if she had to provide the cook's meals next. She threw the canvas bag to the cook and said, "Don't go out these days and try not to make any noise. You should save some food." The cook obediently nodded and took the sail bag. The sky gradually darkened, and outside the door, the drizzling rain began to fall again. The wind blew straight into the interior of the castle through the open door, emitting a whimpering roar. Chioli was rejuvenated and regained all her strength. She heard the sound of the door opening next door, and soon, sparse footsteps could be heard in the hallway. End of this chapter.